My mother-in-law arranged for me to join my husband's company. I am earning a high salary while gossiping about my husband and his crush with the entire company. On the day of our divorce, I was smiling happily while my ex-husband turned red-eyed in front of me. "Darling, let's get back together," he said. "Sorry, I don't have the habit of recycling garbage." After 3 years of marriage, Steve never spent the night at home. Mary, desperate, secretly arranged for me to join his company with a monthly salary of $500,000. "Mom, you can trust me." On my first day in the company, I knew I didn't stand a chance. Steve's new assistant, who had just been appointed less than a month ago, turned out to be Lucy, the one who went abroad to study on the day of our wedding. One night, Steve dropped the bombshell that he only loved her and disappeared for the whole night. I chose to give up and silently persevered in this inconspicuous sales position. But being silent is not my style. I infiltrated the department in less than half a day and gathered with colleagues to gossip at every chance we got. From trivial matters at the front desk to stories that had to be told about Steve and his crush. That woman returned less than 2 months ago and moved into Steve's villa, spending every day going to and from work with him, holding many privileges in the company. My colleagues and I started a betting pool. I bet $100 that Steve would divorce his wife within 2 months at the latest. Watching my colleagues throw money into the pot, I was delighted. Feeling quite pleased with myself, I accidentally confronted that woman. She trembled slightly while holding her coffee, then looked at me awkwardly with a smile. Lucy didn't say a word, so I took the initiative. "Let's make a deal. $500. I won't tell Steve's family about your affairs in the company. Agree and transfer the money." She seemed shocked, but promptly added me as a friend and transferred $500. $5? You can't tell Steve about my affairs in the company, deal or no deal. Lucy looked at me as if I were crazy. With just a few words, I made a deal that would net me $495 profit. Should I tell her? I took her silence as consent and transferred her $5. I felt like the two of us could have a long-term partnership. "How about this? Pay me, and I'll be your informant for $1,000. Any news related to Steve, I'll notify you with an extra $200 for each message." Coming back from work, I didn't expect Steve to be home. He was sitting on the couch reading the newspaper. From changing shoes to entering the house, he didn't look up once. Mary was not pleased and frowned, ready to confront him. I quickly gave Mary a signal. I was worried that Mary might ruin my relationship with Steve, which didn't even exist, and then use it as an excuse to deduct alimony payments from me after the divorce. Mary took a deep breath, turned her head proudly, and went to the kitchen. It was at that moment that Steve finally looked up at me, wanting to say something but hesitating. I gave him an encouraging look. "Honey, do you have something to say to me?" Steve pursed his lips and surprisingly shook his head. "No. You wanted a divorce, right? What's there to say?" "Afraid I won't agree." Overestimating yourself. While I was fuming, I couldn't help but wipe a tear from the corner of my eye. Mary then came out of the kitchen with a spatula in hand. "Steve, are you bullying Jessica again?" Steve frowned at me, clearly displeased, then left without saying a word. At the dinner table, Mary scolded Steve before comforting me. "Jessica, don't worry. I understand him. He's been blinded for too many years, but now he needs to wake up." I thought to myself, let him stay asleep. If he really wakes up to my charm, it's going to be troublesome. "Mom, you can relax. I'll take care of seducing him. Actually, it's for his own good. Get Lucy to take his position sooner. Help me get out of this mess." Along the way, I made sure to send a text to Lucy. "Steve stormed off because of me. Expect him to come to you. Behave well." Lucy promptly transferred $200. Mary gave me a plan. "Tomorrow night, Steve has a gathering. I'll have his colleague get him drunk, then give you the news so you can take him to the hotel while he's drunk, and then." I was fortunate to have a good relationship with Mary. Otherwise, if she played some new tricks on me, I would have woken up on Steve's bed the next morning. Wouldn't that be crazy? Putting the blame on me, I would definitely leave a lasting impression on my husband. Mary was touched and handed me a USB drive, saying it contained 10 gigabytes of resources. I turned around and went straight to resell it. "A gift from Steve's mother, $5,000, do you want it?" Lucy directly transferred the money. "Tomorrow morning, I'll leave it at the front desk, wrapped in a red gift box." Mary is a decisive and influential woman in Steve's family. She warned to get someone to get Steve drunk, and who dared not to listen? That night, several department managers took turns trying to get Steve drunk successfully. It was my turn to step in. With the help of one of the managers, I escorted Steve to the presidential suite prepared by Mary. For our first time together, The suite was obviously meticulously decorated, with all sorts of fancy amenities. I didn't go easy on my husband. I immediately took a picture of Steve's bed and sent it to Lucy. It's $10,000, no less. Lucy transferred the money swiftly as always. Just as I received the payment, Steve suddenly sat up straight. His eyes were red as he looked at me, tilting his head. Jessica. I nodded and pushed him back onto the bed. He raised his hands to struggle, and I quickly reassured him that I wasn't interested in him, and Lucy would take care of him later. He immediately stopped moving. As I turned to leave, Steve suddenly jumped out of bed and grabbed my wrist. Jessica, don't go. I want to have a baby with you. Steve seemed to have gone crazy, trying to pull me onto the bed. Luckily, I had some self-defense skills and managed to subdue him on the spot. He winced in pain and soon dozed off. I slapped his face hard twice, and soon Lucy arrived. Lucy looked shocked at my disheveled hair. I comforted her. Don't worry, I won't touch what I've sold. She immediately looked admiring, and I waved her off. It's more practical to transfer the money. And I earned another $5,000 while holding back tears. I closed the door and looked at the balance in the account, feeling a bit touched. But the real touching part was yet to come. Steve, 3 years of marriage, 3 years of longing for Lucy. Our marriage was also coming to an end. I took the pre-booked room key, checked into the room opposite, took a nice bath, and went to sleep. The next day, the alarm rang at 7, and I called Steve on my phone. He answered quickly, but didn't speak. I asked him where he was. In the apartment in the eastern suburbs. I asked Steve, why do you sound so hoarse? Are you sick with a cold? Probably. Alright. Take some medicine for your cold then. I hung up the phone and sat by the bed for 5 minutes, before sending a message to the journalist I had contacted. Steve, since you dared to deceive me, I'll make you pay immediately. Ready to act. People who take money never disappoint. 10 minutes later, through the peephole, several sneaky journalists surrounded Steve's room, one of them pretending to be a waiter knocking on the door. Shortly after, Steve and Lucy appeared at the door, both in hotel bathrobes. The journalists went crazy taking pictures, and Lucy was so scared that she directly threw herself into Steve's arms. Steve immediately cursed the journalists and closed the door. I settled the final payment with the reporters, grabbed my bag, and hummed a tune on my way to Steve's company. Just as I sat down, I overheard Steve and Lucy's juicy gossip. I immediately expressed my interest. I want to bet on it. $200, says Steve, and his wife will divorce before the end of this month. An hour later, Lucy privately messaged me seeking advice. Mary wanted to see me. Before I could name a price, she transferred $10,000 to me proactively. Feeling happy, I took the money and earnestly pointed her towards a path of success. Stay true to yourself. Don't forget your original intentions. But what I didn't expect was coming home from work. Everything was harmonious at home. Mary and Steve were there, both acting like nothing had happened. Steve even changed his usual cold demeanor, handing me my slippers. At the dinner table, Mary even mentioned promoting me. Jessica, since you've started working at the company, don't stay in sales. Tomorrow, go directly to work as Steve's assistant. Working together as a couple will be so beneficial. All I wanted was to end this marriage, though I agreed on the outside and promptly messaged Lucy. What's going on? Lucy replied, Mary is giving too much. But one can never have too much. No one would reject more. Otherwise, Lucy wouldn't have joined Steve's company. I planned to leave her hanging for a while. I obediently followed Mary's arrangement and became Steve's assistant. On the day I left the sales department, everyone looked at me in shock, never expecting I'd turn out to be Steve's wife. Don't mind them. I'm just a name without substance. I won't be for long. Remember our bet. As I turned around, I bumped into Steve. What bet? I immediately signaled to my colleagues. They eagerly answered, the bet about when you and Jessica will divorce. Steve looked down at me. His eyes were a bit red, his voice hoarse, and there was a vibe about him that made me want to punch him. Not getting divorced. Jessica, we will never get divorced. Steve reached out to hold my hand, but instinctively, I dodged it. His hand froze in midair, and after a while, he awkwardly withdrew it. Let's go, Jessica. On the third day as Steve's assistant, I felt like I wasn't there to assist. Steve never ordered me around, even gave me the most comfortable seat. Because I loved sleeping, he even bought a big bed, and installed a curtain for me to lie down whenever I wanted. I started feeling agitated. At this rate, I would be turning into a useless person to be kept by Steve. So, I activated the lovey-dovey mode. I posted social media updates all day. Steve is looking so handsome today. He bought me a big gold bracelet. Steve gave me $5 million to spend. Finally, Lucy took the bait. On the 7th day, she appeared in Steve's office wearing a white dress, looking pale and fragile. As I was lying on the couch, I hurriedly sat up when I saw Lucy. Steve also stood up and walked towards Lucy. He seemed like he wanted to hug her, but hesitated when I was there, stopping 2 steps away from Lucy. "What are you doing here?" Lucy immediately teared up. "Steve, I miss you." Steve bit his lip, looking like he was enduring a lot. I suggested, "Should I leave to give you some privacy?" "Jessica, don't talk nonsense. There's nothing between me and Lucy." I nodded seriously. "I believe you. You indeed have nothing with Lucy." But seeing her pale complexion and weak walk, clearly suffering emotionally and mentally recently, I think you should personally take her to the hospital, both out of moral and logical obligations. Steve was a bit surprised. "You're not angry? My husband enjoys helping others and friends. Why would I be mad?" "Thank you." Without another word, Steve grabbed Lucy and left. That night when Steve came home, Mary slapped him hard after finding gossip pictures on his phone. Steve apologized to Jessica. Steve questioned, "Isn't it normal to protect Lucy? Making him apologize now might just provoke his rebellious nature, don't you think?" I watched him expectantly, feeling like he was about to say divorce any second. But he disappointed me. He looked at me and earnestly said 3 words, "I'm sorry." To make matters worse, Steve even tried to get intimate with me. Getting ready for bed later, I found him lying there. "Lucy, Steve is in my bed. I'll give you $5 to get him out." Luckily Lucy was quick. She called Steve in less than 3 minutes. Steve hesitated for about 10 seconds before answering the call. Shortly after, he grabbed a jacket and said to me seriously, "Sorry, Jessica. Lucy fell down the stairs. I have to check on her." As he reached the door, he paused. "Jessica, I promise, this is the last time." I guess Steve was starting to see my strengths. Feeling troubled that Steve might fall for me and not want a divorce, I came up with a plan. I found Lucy and offered her a deal, $100,000 to ensure a successful divorce from Steve. Lucy paid a deposit of $50,000, promising the rest upon completion. I told Lucy, "Steve has a strong ego. Just make him realize that I was the one who sent you to the hotel when he was drunk and arranged for the reporters. He'll surely want to divorce me in anger." But just as I set my plan in motion, Lucy announced she was pregnant. 48 days. I breathed a sigh of relief and went for a manicure after work. In the living room that evening, Mary, Steve, and Lucy were all there. It seemed like my plan was working. I changed into slippers gently and got the desired outcome, a divorce. The divorce agreement was fresh. I got 3 houses under Steve's name, $30 million in cash, plus $200,000 alimony per month. I decisively signed my name. Mary looked at me, wiped a tear, and sighed. "Steve, you're an adult now. Don't regret your decisions." Steve didn't respond, just looked at me and mentioned, "We'll go register for divorce tomorrow morning at 9. And with that, he walked out with Lucy. The next morning, Steve was not around, and he seemed like a ghost with red eyes. Concealing my emotions, I comforted him until we completed the divorce registration. At that moment, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Steve, red-eyed, suddenly grabbed me. "Jessica, let's remarry." I pushed his hand away, smiling brightly. "Sorry, I don't recycle trash." I flaunted my divorce certificate in the sales department, earning an extra $2,000. I invited everyone out for dinner. That day, I had a moving company pack up my things from Steve's place and moved into the villa I had prepared 6 months ago. I called Cindy to share my good news. With connections from both my and Steve's families, I had cleared out my savings a year ago to start a foreign trade company. Cindy acted as the face while I operated behind the scenes. Now that I was no longer just Steve's wife, I had no reason to hide. Cindy was thrilled and offered to celebrate my single status. I accepted, underestimating her extravagant style. Arriving at the event the next day, I was stunned. Cindy had organized a grand banquet, inviting all our acquaintances from the circle, including Steve. Steve stood beside Lucy, who instinctively shifted away as I approached. "Oh, this company is yours," I teased as our wine glasses lightly touched, delivering a silent blow. "Don't bother inviting me to your wedding, Steve. I don't want to bring gifts." As I retreated to a corner, the event turned into a gossip hub, with all eyes on me, Steve, and Lucy. About to slip away unnoticed, a man strode in purposefully. John, 6 years older than me, with some family connections through Mary's side, called out, "Uncle," as I always did with Steve. Leaning against the door frame, John's aggressive gaze on my face made me feel a tinge of danger. John proposed a business opportunity, and though we had benefited from a previous collaboration, I hesitated, knowing I wasn't his top choice. John was known for being ruthless. In the end, I agreed, not wanting to miss out on a chance to work with him. I made him the contract in a room upstairs and even played a game together. During the game, I lounged in a comfortable position, causing wrinkles in my dress and messing up my carefully done hair. Upon leaving the room, I unexpectedly found Steve standing there. His shocked expression seemed mixed with sorrow. Walking over, John added, "Jessica, I just learned how formidable you are today." Knowing he misunderstood the situation, I couldn't be bothered to explain. "If it sounds a certain way, let it be." Steve, fists clenched, demanded, "When did this happen?" I retorted, "Just now." "Does it matter? Remember your place, Steve." In that moment, I made it clear that what I did was my own business, and it was done openly and honestly. John, backing me up, remarked, "Jessica, feeling adventurous? How about another round?" I nodded, closing the hotel room door. That seemed like a good idea. Leaving the hotel, my dark circles were showing. Wrapped in John's suit jacket, I couldn't help but shiver. Steve, like a ghost, appeared in front of me. "Jessica, why are you treating me like this?" I reminded Steve. "Lucy has been pregnant for over a month." Steve's face turned pale. "That's unexpected." I straightened his tie. "Steve, we are all adults. Don't play around if you can't take responsibility." John didn't let me down. I made a small profit in less than 3 months of working with him. To show my gratitude, I planned to treat him to dinner, and he insisted on paying. Just after dinner, I ran into Steve. He was drunk and looked at me like a hungry dog eyeing a bone, nodding and walking towards me. "Jessica." He reached out to hug me, but before I could react, John stepped forward, offering Steve his sturdy chest. "Look closely, I'm John." John said it seriously, but as I looked at his slim waist and perky rear, I suddenly felt a bit embarrassed. In the end, it was Jessica who escorted Steve home. Afterwards, he even sent a message to report back. "Successfully delivered." I replied with an emoji. Then Cindy messaged me, "Jessica, what's wrong with Steve?" Along with a voice message was a forwarded video. In the video, Steve, dressed in tonight's clothes, overturned a table at the banquet. The table full of food was ruined, yet he didn't realize his mistake. Paranoid and crazy. "Jessica is my wife. Even if we divorce, she's still my wife." I thought, "Steve, where have you been all this time?" There's a saying, late love is cheaper than grass. How unfortunate. I quickly took a shower and went to bed early. The next morning, as I opened the curtains and stepped onto the balcony, stretching lazily and yawning halfway, I froze. John, wearing a grey loungewear set, was leisurely standing on the balcony of the villa next to mine. "Good morning." After breakfast, I finally saw the private message Steve had sent me. It was around 4 a.m. All voice messages. I randomly clicked on one, and it had a tearful tone. "Jessica, I was wrong. Can we get back together?" I didn't listen to the other voice messages, and simply blocked Steve. I thought for a moment, then found Lucy. "What happened with Steve?" Lucy replied, "I had a miscarriage." No wonder he had such a big change in attitude towards me. Did he really think I would have his child? I advised Lucy, "Don't let him off the hook. Make him compensate you for all the losses." Lucy didn't respond, but after a while, she sent me a voice message. I answered the call, and it was Steve's voice, hoarse. "Jessica, you really used all means to divorce me for John, huh? Steve, do I need to involve someone else to divorce you? Do you have no conscience?" I said, "I have nothing with Lucy." Steve kept sending me voice messages, all of which I rejected. After hanging up on about 10 of them in a row, he sent a message, "Jessica, you will regret it." Sighing, I also blocked Lucy. I thought there might be no more opportunities to earn extra money in the future. As I was getting ready to leave, Lucy called. Her voice was heavy. $2,000. I'll sell you a piece of information. In a twist of karma, I finalized the deal for $200. Just one line. "Jessica, be careful of Steve. He knows about our deal." Thinking of Steve's words just now, I understood. So, he thinks it's all my fault. Yes, but doesn't he love you? Lucy remained silent and returned $200 to me. "Because the child isn't his." Lucy said a few more words before mentioning she couldn't stay here anymore and planned to look for someone to take over abroad. I wished her the best, then we deleted each other's contact information. Before deleting, Lucy praised me a bit. "Jessica, Steve really doesn't deserve you." Steve probably had grown to hate me. Soon enough, he started to create obstacles for me. In just 2 months, our company had lost several clients. Cindy was very anxious, constantly saying she wanted to confront Steve, but I reassured her. "Not now. Go buy a gun first." Cindy was shocked. "It's not that serious, is it?" I chuckled. "Perhaps it's even worse than you imagine." Cindy's demeanor immediately tensed up. Seeing she was in a good state, I handed her a collaboration project I had prepared long ago, instructing her to give it her all and secure the deal. After just half a month, Cindy came to me in tears. "Jessica, I've been intercepted." "I know," I said. "I didn't expect you to pull it off, but unfortunately, this is a job only you can do." Cindy was a bit dazed. I said, "Steve has made a huge mistake in the market. rushing to compete with me for business without checking the background. This is Leo, who is heavily in debt behind the scenes. If Steve partners with him, it's just going to dig a bigger hole for himself. Doesn't he like snatching other people's business? Well, here's a gift for him. Cindy hugged me tightly. At this moment, John called. Will you have dinner with me? I didn't refuse. At the Western restaurant, clinking glasses, I stared at John directly. I heard you've established a collaboration channel with Overseas W Group. Digesting all those orders completely won't be easy, right? John nodded. I poked at the steak on the plate with my fork. Across from me, he smiled gently and said, but if you're interested. I immediately looked up at him and replied, interested. Interested, even if there is only a little bit of profit. I'm interested. John shook his head. I can't bear to see you work so hard. According to your current supply volume, I'll give you 10% of the orders. How about that? I raised my glass. John didn't clink glasses with me. He leaned his head on his hand and looked at me, somehow a bit flirtatious. My heart rate quickened. I rode home with John that evening. Before the car even entered the garage, I saw Steve standing at my doorstep. It had been a while since we last met, and he looked much thinner. Seeing me getting out of John's car, Steve's gaze fell directly on me. Finally, he approached me and said, Jessica, I want to talk to you. John rolled down the car window and gave me a meaningful look. I replied to Steve, just say it. After hesitating for a moment, Steve said, Jessica, I've been thinking recently. I was wrong before. I made mistakes. But we've been married for 3 years. There couldn't have been no feelings at all. If you remarry me, I'll return the orders I took from you. What do you think? I took a step back. No, Steve, don't try to smear me. Do you know how difficult it has been for me to endure being a widow for so many years? We're divorced, and you still want to insult me. I didn't mean that, Jessica. That's not what I meant. Steve pursed his lips and glanced at John. Anyway, you and John are even now. If you don't mind me, I won't mind you. Let's remarry. Before I could respond, John got out of the car. He wrapped his arm around my waist. I felt like John was taking advantage of me, so I couldn't help pinching him on the waist. Suddenly, Steve's gaze became quite menacing. Jessica, you and John won't end up together. I won't allow it. I got angry and cursed at Steve. Eventually, Steve got frustrated and left. Watching his back as he walked away, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. As I turned my head back, I saw John rubbing his chin and looking at me. I blushed instantly. After an internal company investigation, I found out I couldn't attract a wife by being too serious. So, I decided to stop being serious from that day on. Are you ready, little Jessica? John said. I thought John was joking, but he was serious. From then on, he greeted me every day on the balcony, even changing into pink love-themed loungewear. Every morning before heading to work, he would be standing at my doorstep, holding a rose. In the afternoon after work, it was still him, but this time with a bouquet of flowers. Although I didn't agree to John's pursuit, rumors in our social circle started spreading about John and me being in a hot romance. His pursuit was too intense, and I faintly felt that I couldn't resist much longer. As for Steve, news about him occasionally reached my ears. Due to the order he snatched from me recently, he had been busy trying to cover the losses and even shook the foundation of the parent company. He started laying off employees frantically, but the money saved from layoffs was still not enough. In the end, Mary intervened, removed Steve from his position, sold a few properties to stabilize the company. Steve temporarily became jobless, and the circle would occasionally post his miserable figure. But I couldn't seem to calm down. Every time I heard about Steve, I remembered what Lucy once told me. Jessica, be careful with Steve. I decided to meet up with Steve. He seemed like a ticking time bomb now, and I thought it would be better if I took the initiative instead of letting him take control. I took a deep breath and said firmly, no. Steve's face darkened. So, Jessica, you went out of your way to divorce me, set me up for a big fall, did all these things to me, and yet you had no intention of getting back together with me. If you didn't plan on that, what are you doing here? The paranoia in Steve's eyes made my heart skip a beat. I tried not to show my panic. Steve, you are still my ex-husband. I don't want you to fall so low. Fine then. Steve stood up. Let's get back together. I also jumped up and tried to run toward the door, but Steve was faster. He grabbed my hair and pulled me back. I tried to break free, but he slapped me hard across the face. Jessica, you are such a wicked woman. I cried as he hit me, but then he suddenly softened. I'm sorry, Jessica, it's all my fault. I realized too late that I love you. Can we start over? Just then my phone lit up with a call from John. I rushed over as if in a frenzy, but before I could answer the call, Steve grabbed me. He tied me up and threw me into the utility room next to the living room. Jessica, I'll make you realize John doesn't love you that much either. Your choice is destined to be wrong. Then Steve used my phone to call John. John, come to my house. He handed me another phone. The screen displayed the living room surveillance feed. Soon enough, I saw John on the screen, dressed in a suit, wearing glasses, looking even more refined than usual. After entering the villa, he sat down at Steve's invitation. What about Jessica? Not now. Steve poured a glass of water for John and asked, I'm curious. How did Steve end up with my wife? I mean, ex-wife. Alright, ex-wife. Why did you fall for my ex-wife? John looked at Steve silently. I felt there was something dangerous behind those slightly tinted glasses. But when he spoke, his voice was clear and gentle, like a breeze in March. Why did I fall for Jessica? Probably because of you, Steve. It was the first time I heard John speak so calmly. From our first meeting to the present interaction, the first time we met was at your wedding. Steve, you probably didn't notice, but Jessica loved you. I felt sorry for her back then, thinking she loved the wrong person. Later, your mom took her to expand her social circle. I saw her a few times, and I realized she wasn't a woman who needed my pity. She knew what she wanted. Back then she wanted to be a good wife to you. So she studied everything your mom taught her seriously and tried to cut ties with her family. Steve trembled slightly as John spoke, as if he had realized something unbelievable. Impossible. She loved me. She wanted to be my wife. I clenched my teeth subconsciously, angry enough to want to tear Steve's mouth apart. But tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. I had loved Steve in the past, so brutally. It was only when I divorced him that I could be so decisive, so merciless. I did love Steve once. Unfortunately, he didn't know, but John saw it all clearly. John looked sympathetic. Steve, have you ever thought about something? Why does your mom like Jessica so much? If she didn't love you, would your mom like her this much? Steve looked tense, lost in his thoughts. John continued, later on, I noticed that her gaze towards you changed. It became calm, restrained, devoid of love. It was during that time she started her current company. She also stole my heart. Steve, you will never know you had a treasure in your hands. If you had just held on a little tighter, but you missed it forever. John's voice was so alluring. Steve's face turned paler with every word. Steve, I fell for Jessica completely because of you. You loved someone else, left her alone to uphold your marriage, but I saw her perseverance and resilience. You were angry with her for plotting the divorce, but have you thought about what you were doing during those 2 years she gave you a chance? Steve, do you think you deserve Jessica back? When you didn't want her, she was nothing. Now that you want her, sorry, you can no longer afford her. I thought Steve would go crazy, but in the end, he sat on the floor, crying loudly. So, she did love me. And then, the door of Steve's house was knocked open. The police and Mary rushed in together. Steve was restrained. John's calm demeanor finally collapsed. He grabbed Steve's collar like a madman. What about her? Steve glanced towards the utility room. Soon, John burst in. He untied me, removed the gag from my mouth, and trembled as he held me in his arms. I wiped away a tear secretly. I never expected my biggest secret, that I had loved Steve, to be so clearly seen by this older man. I thought I was just a passing phase for him, but little did I know I had left an indelible mark on his heart. For a while, I teased John saying, you were so calm just now, weren't you? John couldn't resist cursing. You loved Steve. It was a secret I intended to keep forever, but I ended up spilling it all out. How can I be calm? You heartless woman. I leaned against John, laughing uncontrollably. John, I never knew you liked me for so long. Waiting for your divorce every day, was it easy for me? You have no idea how I spent this past year. I wanted to come find you, but I was afraid Steve would find out. And if he knew someone was after you, would I stand a chance? I was on the verge of madness from laughing. John's face looked even worse. I poked his chest. John, to make it up to you, how about me finding you a wife? John didn't answer, but I could hear his heart beating strongly. After a while, he said, no turning back. I laughed. Of course I won't. Besides, I still owe you a lot of photos to take. The future is going to be quite busy.